Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. And if you're new here, thank you so much for stopping by. My name is Torkova, and I'm a professional magician and mind reader. I've been doing magic since I was 7 years old, and it's truly my passion. I also have a speech impediment. I've been a stutterer for most of my life. I have it pretty well managed, but it still crops up from time to time. I just wanted to put that out there in case it happens during the video. Anyway, I'm very happy that you're here, and if you enjoyed the content, please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons. It really does help boost the channel. Today, I'm going to share my story of how I got on the Penn and Teller's TV show, Fool Us. This is a show where magicians come on and try to fool Penn and Teller. If they do, they get a trophy and a guest spot in their live Las Vegas show. Now, I've been a big fan of Penn and Teller for many years, and wasn't too sure I could fool them. But even if I didn't fool them, it would still be a great showcase for my magic. The hard part was figuring out exactly what I would perform on the show. While I have always been good at being able to come up with improvements and technical solutions to tricks, I've never actually created an original trick of my own, much less one that will fool Penn and Teller. Now, in terms of getting on the show, I knew one thing was not in my favor: my age. They rarely had an older person on the show. I had heard that the producers insisted on using magicians under 40 in order to attract a younger demographic. However, recently I was told that they had relaxed that rule. In late 2019, I got the idea to work on a magic routine I had wanted to do ever since I was a kid. It had to do with scarves and making a magical American flag. While this routine was quite old, I had never seen it done quite the way I had read about it in my old magic books. It had instead, in a simplified version, become a staple in many children's magic shows. This is quite different from the sophisticated handlings from the 1940s. After months of experimenting, I finally hit upon a workable idea. I assembled all the props and worked out the basic structure of the routine. All I had to do now was rehearse it. It was around this time that the COVID pandemic hit. I made good use of my time by isolating myself in my New York apartment, rehearsing the act. I sent in my audition video just one day before the deadline, on December 20th, 2020. Months went by and I hadn't heard anything. It was now March 2021, and I had just about given up any hope of getting on the show. However, one day I woke up and resolved to push forward. I would work harder, refine the act, and submit it for the next year. But in order to get accepted on the show, I knew I would have to take my magic to the next level. I hired a magic coach who was connected with the show. At first I thought working with someone on the show would be a conflict of interest. But I was told that it wasn't an issue, and that he had coached many other acts. The producers just wanted everyone to be the very best they could be. So, over Zoom, we started our coaching sessions. I mentioned to him that I had my eye to appear on the following year. He said, "But what about this season?" I told him I thought the deadline had passed months ago. Well, he surprised me by saying that due to COVID, they were having trouble getting acts, so they had to extend the deadline into April. Now, one of the biggest hurdles I faced was that I was performing a classic magic trick. This would make the prospect of fooling Penn and Teller even more difficult. But since I didn't have any original material, my plan was to make the method as unique and as clever as possible. For my whole life, I've almost always worked alone. But this time, hiring a magic coach made all the difference in the world. After about a dozen Zoom sessions, I submitted the new video on April 12th, 2021. The very next day, I received an email saying that I was under final consideration and to leave specific dates open in the summer. And a few weeks later, I was officially accepted onto the show. This would be my first national television appearance. But there was still a lot of work to do. My coaches and I worked on refining the act to get it as deceptive and smooth as possible. In addition, the show's producers would now also be giving me their feedback and ideas. There were two main areas we focused on. One was to dramatically cut the time of the act to less than 3 minutes if possible. The other was to develop more of a storyline for my character. In particular, during my act, my character was to focus on simply getting a task done, making an American flag. I was not to look at or engage the audience until the very end of the act. After a few more weeks of work, everyone agreed the act was finally ready. Then started many email exchanges between myself and various support personnel. Primarily, I was Zooming with the package producer. The package is the short bio video that precedes the performance. This would be shot after I arrive in Las Vegas and before the actual taping. Now, since I have a speech impediment and am still very self-conscious about it, I planned on doing what I did best. I was most comfortable performing a so-called silent act. In this, I would not speak, but perform in pantomime to music. The following weeks, I rehearsed more intensely than ever. My goal was to do the act 1,000 times before the taping. I think I made it to about 620. The other goal was to get the act to under 4 minutes. And when we finished, the final timing was 3 minutes and 28 seconds. My coach had told me that even though I could do up to 5 minutes, the shorter the act, the better. This was because the shows are not taped in order. In fact, they tape all of the acts for the entire season in less than 2 weeks. Afterwards, the acts are edited together into various episodes. And each episode is based around Penn and Teller's own magic routine they perform at the end of the show. Now, the producers don't know in advance how long Penn and Teller's own segments will take. But once Penn and Teller finish taping their trick, the producers know how much time they have left to divide up amongst the other acts. Therefore, the shorter the acts are, the easier it is for them to fit it into the episode. It is now June 15th, exactly 1 week before I fly out to Las Vegas. The show would pay all my expenses, my flight, my hotel, a performance fee, a stipend for meals. An interesting thing I noticed in my contract was that I was not being paid to give a performance. I was a contestant on a game show. This would allow the producers to get around not paying royalties on any future airings of the show. They had originally scheduled me to fly out on Thursday, June 24th. They would shoot the viral video the next day, and then on Sunday do the actual taping with Penn and Teller. However, I wanted to fly out early. I knew I needed a few extra days to rehearse in my hotel room before the taping. Also wanted to give myself a buffer in case the airline lost my luggage and my act. I certainly didn't need to be worrying about that. As requested by the producers, before leaving, I took and mailed in a COVID test. This would be the first of many I would need to take. After arriving in Las Vegas, I was picked up for the short ride to the Rio Hotel. This is where I would be staying and the show would be taping. After checking in with the hotel, I went to check in with the show. I signed some paperwork and got another COVID test. I was then given my official show badge. I went to my room to unpack my props. I leisurely set up the flag act and did a little rehearsing. The next day, I stayed in my room and rehearsed the entire time. On Thursday morning, I went down to the theater and took another COVID test. Back in my room, I rehearsed until 7 o'clock when I was to meet some friends for dinner. I hadn't seen them in years, and it was great to catch up with them and get my mind off the show. It's Friday morning, and I was scheduled to shoot my bio video at 9:45. After taking another COVID test, I was escorted through the theater to a backstage area where they were shooting the videos. There were 2 small rooms set up with green screens. One room was for the sit-down interview, and the other one was for the performances. There were 2 crews to do the makeup and shoot the video. I had brought 3 changes of clothes along with some small tricks. I met with the video producer with whom I had Zoomed. For the interview, I changed into a dress shirt and some slacks. But when I started answering the producer's questions, I tended to go on too long. We often had to stop and have me repeat my answers with shorter sentences. This would make it easy for them to edit and fit it into the amount of time that they had. I finished the interview and we moved to another room to get some performance footage. For this, I changed into a suit. But our 2-hour time limit for use of the rooms was running out fast, and I hadn't done any tricks yet. They quickly set up a table and videotaped me doing some magic with cards and coins. After a few minutes, we were told that we were overtime and had to finish up as the next act was waiting outside. I quickly changed clothes and threw my props into my road case. We looked for somewhere to continue shooting and found a nearby empty dressing room. I changed into a different suit and we videotaped a few more tricks. Afterwards, we moved to one of the hotel's community rooms. For the next 40 minutes, we continued to shoot more footage. The total allowed time to shoot my bio package was 2 hours. However, the videographer said he was so fascinated with my story that he felt that I deserved more time. We finished at 1:45 after shooting for a total of 4 hours. When we were done, I packed up and went back to my room to rehearse the rest of the day. Now it's Saturday, and the day before the taping. I stayed in my room all day and did some serious rehearsing into the early evening. I slept well that night, and then it was finally here, Sunday and taping day. My call time was for the late afternoon at 3:55. I went down before breakfast to get my final COVID test out of the way. After eating, I bought a couple of sandwiches to take back to my room. I didn't want to later interrupt my rehearsing by having to go out for lunch. Back in my room, I rehearsed intensely. Afterwards, I felt very anxious and concerned. My rehearsing was uneven, sometimes working well, other times not so well. When I was done, I ironed my suit and all my scarves for the act, including a full set of backup scarves. I knew I would need them since after the dress rehearsal, my first set of scarves would be all wrinkled. This way, I would have fresh ones for the taping. I changed into my suit and went down to the theater. My escort led me backstage via a winding route to some freight elevators and then up to the stage. Or so I thought. To my surprise, she took me outside of the theater where it was blazing hot. Now generally, I don't do too well in the heat, especially wearing my dress suit and carrying all my equipment. Behind the theater, we went down some stairs, walked to another door, and then up some other stairs. This led us back inside the theater. During those 5 minutes, I was already perspiring from the intense heat. After asking, I was told that we had to go outside so as to avoid any hallways that Penn and Teller might use. As I had heard, the producers were very strict about Penn and Teller not seeing any of the magicians before the taping. We took another elevator down to the basement where the prop room was located. This was a very large space filled with all sorts of furniture and props. My escort led me to a corner where there were a couple of couches and a coffee table. She told me that this is where I was set up for the show. I couldn't believe we weren't given dressing rooms. When I asked her about it, she said it was because, again, the producers didn't want to risk any of the acts running into Penn and Teller backstage. My escort waited patiently while I set up the act. She told me I didn't have to hurry, but I was so anxious that I did so anyway. When I was ready, carrying all my props, we took an elevator to the main stage. I was so relieved we didn't have to go outside again. It was pretty dark backstage. Some of the crew came over with flashlights to help us navigate all the cables that snaked around the floor. I had some last-minute preparations that had to be done just before going on. This the crew hadn't expected, and they had to hold the rehearsal for me. However, now I took my time, especially since it was very dark right behind the curtain, and I had to get ready, having only the flashlights to see by. I was told that in past years the dress rehearsal was done the day before the actual taping. This is for the director and the camera crew to set up the shots. But, due to COVID, they would tape the dress rehearsal and then immediately tape the performance. Penn, Teller, and the host, Allison, were not present for the dress rehearsal. I found out that they had 9 ultra-high-definition cameras to capture the action. I looked out into the large theater and all the empty seats. And again, due to COVID, there would be no live audience, only a virtual one. Running along the back row of the seats was a giant long green screen which stretched from one side of the theater to the other. This is where the virtual audience would sit. The stage manager directed me to a yellow mark on the floor where I would stand during my act. He then pointed to a second mark where I would move to afterwards to speak to Allison. I told him that I was ready, and my music started. Everything went fine, and I was relieved the rehearsal went well. The director came down and pointed out one small glitch for me to correct. He also had one other suggestion. It was simply to pause a little long at one particular point. I confessed to him how nervous I was, and he reassured me that it went great and just to have fun. I reset the act while everyone stood around and waited. I went backstage to get my freshly ironed set of scarves. I finished setting up and told them I was ready. Then they sent me backstage while Penn, Teller, and Allison were brought into the theater. After a few minutes, I was given the cue to come out on stage. I did so, being very careful not to trip on the cables. Thank goodness for the crew's flashlights. I walked out on stage. Penn and Teller waved to me, said hello, and wished me luck. I thanked them and I took my mark. Allison took her place and we exchanged smiles. She introduced me and my music started. Doing my best not to show my nervousness, I went through the act again without a hitch. I breathed a sigh of relief. I felt good about my performance and stepped forward to my next mark. Allison did likewise, and we started to chat as Penn and Teller talked amongst themselves. We spoke for perhaps 5 or 6 minutes. Since I did a classic trick that Teller was very familiar with, I knew it wasn't going to take long to make his notes to Penn. When they finished, Allison was cued via her earpiece to wrap up our conversation. We turned to Penn and Teller. Penn told me how much they enjoyed my act, that it was a classic, which they didn't see much on their show. As he always does, he mentioned some key words about the method, letting me know that they knew how I did it. Allison asked me if they were correct. I smiled and said yes. I figured they would know. As previously directed, I then walked off the stage right, smiling and waving to my imaginary audience. Once I was off stage, the director asked me to wait in the wings in case I was needed again. Here they presumably reviewed the footage to confirm everything was good. They soon released me and I packed up. I decided not to go back to the basement to change, but instead headed directly to my hotel room. I flew home the following Wednesday after visiting with some other friends. I arrived in the early evening exhausted and collapsed onto my couch. I only then thought that I had actually done it. I had appeared on Penn and Teller. And while of course I would love to have fooled them, I was happy everything went well and that they enjoyed my act. As my magic coach remarked when we first started, if you get on the show, you've won. And I completely agree. Well, thank you for watching. In the description below, you'll find a link to my performance on the show. If you've enjoyed this video, please help me out and hit the like and subscribe buttons. And comment below to tell me your thoughts. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.